Unlike the King and the Prime Minister, I'm going to mention that today is Ash Wednesday and the beginning of Lent. It is truly extraordinary in the year of our Lord 2025 that with all their social media portals, neither the royal family nor 10 Downing Street have even commented on the beginning of Lent. Although the last time I looked, they were Ramadan Mubaraking everybody in sight, even while they were massacring Palestinian Muslims in Gaza and turning away from the massacre of Muslims in other places in the region. So my daughter got the ash today, and very, very fine she looked for it too. But the big story this evening is that Zelensky has changed his mind again. He's in the grip of a kind of schizophrenia, and he may well have sold the same mineral rights twice to two entirely different partners. It looks as if he signed in the 100-year deal. How absurd and vainglorious is that? 100-year treaty. I've got it sitting on my desk. I'm looking very carefully at some of the clauses, Keir Starmer. If you imagine that your 100-year treaty is going to silence me, you don't know me at all. But in the 100-year deal, it's clear that Zelensky has sold the mineral rights in the western part of Ukraine, I'll come back to that point in a minute, to Keir Starmer, which presumably explains the largesse being lavished by the British Exchequer on the little coke sniffer. £8 billion sterling has been given by Keir Starmer to Zelensky since Starmer became Prime Minister not even a year ago, not even 9 months ago. 8 billion in 9 months is pretty good going. But then there might have been gold in them there hills, or at least minerals, and Starmer had secured the rights to them, except having refused in the White House to sign a deal giving the same minerals to the United States, having been thrown out of the White House, almost physically ordered off the premises, refusing to sign the mineral agreement, Zelensky has now said in a letter to Donald Trump, which actually is a tweet. The postal services are so last century. I mean, snail mail, forget it. Send a tweet between one president and the other, totally capitulating and saying that you're coming back, you want to come back, having said that you will never go back, having been told by President Trump you'll never be allowed back. Now he wants back in the White House. But he wants Macron and Starmer to go with him. Maybe like, a couple who've adopted him, his guardians. Macron and a man, I know it's hard to believe, but Starmer and Macron were ready to go, or at least until this afternoon when Macron denied that he was going to go. So it looks like only Starmer wants to accompany little Zelensky back to the White House, where he will sign over the exact same minerals he's already sold to the British to the United States of America. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has scrapped the intelligence sharing agreement that he had with Ukraine. The United States has 8,000 plus satellites orbiting the battlefield right now. Most of them, incidentally, owned by Elon Musk, a member of Donald Trump's government. And those satellites are now switched off for Ukraine, which means Ukraine has no idea of Russian troop movements, whether the Russians are moving up somewhere or not. You cannot fight a war without that kind of intelligence, and Zelensky now doesn't have it. Neither does he have any more American weapons, which have been halted at the depots in which they were being stored, ready to be shipped in. The Germans have declared that they have no more weapons left to give to Ukraine. If Vladimir Putin's thinking of restaging Berlin 1945, this would appear to be a good time to do it, as the Germans have run out of ammunition. The Poles have made it clear that they will not be sending any forces to the Ukraine. The Italians, having agreed at the weekend to do so, have now declared that they are retreating. Who would have thunk it? An Italian government, an Italian army leaving the field so soon. So it's us and the French. Except it's not even us and the French. Those of you who know anything about French military prowess since the Napoleonic era know that the French army, well, to put it kindly, cannot be relied upon. And the lads that had to be lifted off the beach at Dunkirk and their sons and daughters could tell you more about that. So it looks like it's only us, except there's only 74,000 of us. That's the entire strength of the British Army, of which only half are frontline soldiers. The rest are hairdressers and auxiliaries and ambulance personnel and firefighters and clerks and typists. So we're down to a very small number of forces indeed, which is why I raised the hue and cry in the last few days over the imminence of conscription being returned to the United Kingdom. It could not be otherwise, because Starmer said he was going to send 30,000 British soldiers to act as so-called peacekeepers in the western part, presumably, of Ukraine, except that would leave us with fewer than 15,000 soldiers left in the entire country, in the entire world. They'd have to take the guards of Buckingham Palace and the Palace of Westminster in order to make a deployment of that size. And so it is axiomatic that any madcap foreign adventure expeditionary force like Starmer announced at the weekend he was going to form would require your sons and daughters to be conscripted to perchance die for Keir Starmer in a charge of the Light Brigade. And so last evening, my party, the Workers' Party of Britain, launched No to Conscription. It's a league. It's a broadly based coalition of all right-thinking people and organisations. And I invite you to go to the Workers' Party of Britain portals and sign up and join the league. The league is the real issue here. I was asked on RT this afternoon. I don't know if I was committing any kind of offence. I wasn't paid for it, so I doubt if I was. But I made the point to RT this afternoon that it's Britain's simple refusal, a bit like Manchester United, to recognise that we are no longer a top team, that we are no longer the champions, that we are no longer even a top four, or even a top six, or in the case of Manchester United, even a top half of the table team. That's what Britain is. And it's British governments, successive British governments, refusal to acknowledge that overwhelming truth that is the source of all our troubles. That 8 billion I just told you about, that we have already given Zelensky and have pledged to give him for 100 years, long after everyone doing the pledging is dead, even after their children are long dead. We're going to be giving the Ukrainian state £4 billion a year. But the cost of taking away the cold weather payments for our mothers and fathers, grandfathers and grandmothers in a bitter British winter was half of 4 billion, 2 billion. So we made a conscious decision to freeze our old age pensioners, to give it to Zelensky to set fire to as many others as he possibly could. And if you think that the British public will put up with that in perpetuity, you have a lower opinion of the British public than I do. I predict the 100-year treaty will not survive the end of this Parliament. And in any case, no Parliament can bind its successor, and the successor Parliament ought to trash the whole thing, put it in the dustbin of history. Anybody who thinks in terms of 100 years or 1,000 years anyone who thinks in terms of building a new Reich or a new empire in Europe, failing, flailing Europe, is really lost the place. They are one flew over the cuckoo's nest. But it is remarkable, the kind of things that are happening. The Hungarian government, a member of the European Union, has just had its voting rights taken away from it by the European Parliament because it had the temerity to seek to block yet another massive tranche of billions of euros going from the European Union to Zelensky and Ukraine. And as I've raised this before with you, exactly what is this money supposed to be spent on? The American armory and depots are lost to it now. The British military-industrial complex, the German, the Polish, the French simply are unable to produce more weapons of war. So what are we giving this money for? It's hard to avoid the temptation that it is a money laundering scheme and that the kickbacks from it will be considerable. We already know the extent of the kickbacks that are going to Ukrainian politicians and officials, even low-level officials. One low-level civil servant in the Ukrainian Department of Defense was arrested less than a week ago with $14 million in cash. And that's before you even calculate the sell-on prices of weapons that have been delivered that are now turning up everywhere from Africa to the Mexican drug cartels. This is a gigantic scam. You know, Madoff went to jail, not for as long as he should have. But this is a Ponzi scheme. This is a scam bigger than any that humanity has ever experienced before. And it looks like Trump and Musk are determined to bring it to an end. But, as they're fond of saying in relation to China, at what cost? Are they going to simply redeploy all this material, all this money, towards other theaters of potential conflict or actual conflict? Why are these B-52s on the base, the tarmac of the base, biggest American base in the world, in Qatar? Are they going to attack Iran? Are they intending a war with China? China said today, in relation to a very ill-judged, if I may say so, trade war, the first shots of which were fired by Trump yesterday against China. Putting tariffs on China is a very bad idea. First of all, because China is well placed to tariff you. And China owns more US dollars than the US Treasury itself owns. China owns enough US Treasury bills and bonds to sink the United States economy simply by dumping them on the international market. Now, China presently has no plans to do anything about that hegemony, shall I call it, not least because they like money in China and they don't want to lose it by selling at 20 cents or 50 cents off the dollar. But they could, and any kind of trade war with China will end with America as the loser. America's declaring trade wars everywhere. The United States and Canada are in the middle of a trade war. Trump said last night before the Congress that he was going to have Greenland, to quote him, one way or another. I remind you that the United States and Denmark are NATO allies. The Danish Prime Minister, meanwhile, can speak about nothing except Russia, 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 while America is openly threatening to take your sovereign territory. Now, I don't give a toss, not a toss, about Greenland. For that matter, not a toss about Denmark or Canada. Frankly, they all deserve each other. Canada, which has been a supine, arse-kissing, crawling ally of the United States for so long, I can scarcely remember the days when Canada was a nice word in the world. And so if Trump is now turning on them, good luck to them. Don't come asking the Crown to send nuclear weapons to defend you. Oh, wait. Chrystia Freeland, who's running to be the next Prime Minister of Canada to succeed Trudeau, thought he'd resigned, by the way. Like a bad penny, turns up every day, months after he declared his resignation. But Freeland said yesterday that in a conflict with Trump, British nuclear weapons would protect Canada. This is what I mean about one flew over the cuckoo's nest. She's imagining that Britain, with its nuclear weapons, will defend Canada against the United States of America. But there's another problem with that. Britain doesn't have any independent nuclear weapons. British use of nuclear weapons has to be agreed with the United States. And the United States, by flicking a switch, could make it impossible for us to use them. So Friedland thinks that we're going to defend Canada against the United States with nuclear weapons which are under the control of the United States. How did it come to pass that the world was ruled by raving, blithering idiots, as it appears now to be? The Arab League, who knew the Arabs had a league? I mean, this is really third division, maybe fourth division league. But the Arabs have got a peace plan for Gaza, sponsored by Egypt. A massive spend to rebuild Gaza without moving the Palestinian people out. Well, Trump has already rejected it. So let's see what happens next. But a more important, urgent, and immediate question is that Israel has just switched off the water, the food, the medicine, all the necessary means of life from Gaza again, in defiance of the peace agreement, the ceasefire agreement, which they themselves signed. They signed a deal in which prisoners would be exchanged on a mutual basis each week, and that 100 trucks a day of urgently needed humanitarian aid would be allowed into the Gaza Strip, and that Israel would vacate the Philadelphia corridor, which is where the gate between Egypt and Gaza is, so that they could not stop this aid coming in again. They have just unilaterally binned it. They're no longer going to be bound by it. And people, refugees, women, and children are being murdered in Gaza all over again. Oh, give it up for Lent, why don't you? I'll be right back with the first guest of the evening after this short break. Stay tuned.